Hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week my guest is Dame and actor Richard Aucott. Richard's been trailing the balls for so many years now and his Dame is known UK-wide. We talk all about his rise to Dame, his look and of course his famous costumes. So please sit back and enjoy the latest Panto podcast. My guest for today's Panto podcast is Mr. Richard Aucott. How are you?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, great, thank you. And we're backstage, and you're minus glitter at the moment. Anywhere, I can't see it.
No, it's for once I've actually managed to get most of it off.
Now you say that, I do see a little sparkle there.
Yeah.
So
one can't go around Middlesbrough without a little bit of glitter on.
Oh dear mate. So, did you always want to be involved with theatre and theatricals?
My family is distinctly untheatrical. Except the furthest back I can go, the only sort of theatrical I can find is my grandfather on my mother's side was a church organist. And that's the only bit of any form of performance I can find in my family at all. No one else has done it. It's never come from anywhere. Literally, mine came from I was 13. Knowing, school, just did the usual school play and everything. And then suddenly one day, I was asked to audition to play. A local amateur theatre wanted some children to do Toad of Toad Hall, and they wanted some children. So I went to do that with a friend of mine, and I was the back end of the horse. So literally, I can say I started as the back end of a horse in the show, and went up from there and stayed there I did 20 years on and off with them.
Wow.
Doing Shakespeare, and the interesting thing about that theatre was it was a lot of ex-professionals. I was never treated as a child. There was no children's theatre in that company. It was literally you went in as an adult member.
So it was a full kind of rep.
Yeah, it was
theatre.
a rep, old-fashioned rep theatre. A lot of them were ex-professionals. So I was taught, backstage etiquette right from word go. You were taught how to be backstage and go right from there, right through to musicals, and literally you did your hand at anything. So I can light a show, I can do sound, I can direct, I can whatever I need to be, I can do if I have to. I can sew a costume, I've done it.
So where do you think that came from then? Did you go and see many shows?
No, we didn't even see pantomimes when I was children. The school I went to took us to the ballet, although having said that, the first ballet I saw was Le Film Malgarde, which, if you know, has the famous clog dance done by the mother, which is played by a man, so there is something there, but I can remember seeing that. That was back at the Birmingham Hippodrome before they started doing the Nutcracker every year, so I can remember going there and seeing those. I was 13 when I saw my first pantomime, 1993.
Which one was that?
It was Dick Whittington at the Birmingham Hippodrome. Were taken by my secondary school. It was a sort of joint project with a younger school, a younger group. And it was Leslie Joseph, John Nettles, Wayne Sleep as the cat, Geoffrey Holland as the Dame, Rosemary Ford playing Dick Whittington, and the Simmons brothers. I can still remember it. I can remember the opening scene, literally, of Fairyland, of literally as a neon line with Fairyland, which they still use. And there was literally a chair with its back to the audience, and the light came on. The phone rings. This fairy walked on, this male sort of domo thing, and answered the phone. And it was like, Cinderella, no, she can't be bothered. And then another phone call came, and no, she doesn't want to help Snow White today. And the last one was, there's a young man, who is it? His name's Dick, and his arm just comes out and goes, I'll take it. And then Leslie Joseph turns around, and there we are. And I just remember that opening. I mean, that's 30 years ago now. And
is that the thing that kind of made you want to get into this, do you reckon?
I suppose the interesting thing I found about that was we were taken on a tour of the theatre first with that, and so we went around, saw all backstage. So I've always liked seeing what's behind. I mean, there is quite a thing I love about being on stage and seeing the flats with different things painted off it. I love seeing the old bits that say Alexandra Theatre 1945, some of the old sets that are still around. Especially when they've been changed over. One of the amphitheatres I worked with as a young man had a full set of Derek Salberg scenery, but it'd been painted over that many times, but the back still was there, and it was their Aladdin set.
Wow.
And I just loved seeing the back of it was more important than the front of it. I mean, it'd been painted over very badly a number of times, and it was the rock cutout where Abanazar sticks his head through, and I just remember that bit being there. But I just wish I'd have seen the original incarnation of it. But I mean, I love seeing those old pictures. I mean, I'd love to have seen like the House of Cards, which I think Derek Salberg used to do, where at the end of the Queen of Hearts, which is very rarely done now, the whole of the castle of cards collapses into itself and becomes the one deck left on the stage. And I just wish it's the spectacle that is gone in a way. There is certain spectacles become bigger and other spectacles fall back.
Is that what's important then, do you think, in a pantomime?
No, Panto should always have heart. If it hasn't got heart, it's got nothing. You can throw all the spectacle you like at it, but if people don't believe in the story, there has to be that essence of reality. It's like farce. I was always taught a good farce is a real situation spiralling out of control. If it hasn't got that base of a real person that you connect with, you've got nothing. You can have as much funniness as you like, but if the actual story has to be there, and if there isn't that, you've got nothing.
Have you seen pantos like that?
Oh yeah, there are many of them that have come across over the years where you can throw any special effect you like at it, but I'm not, But at the end of the day, without it, and that's, I suppose, why the big stories have kept going, why Cinderella's there, why Jack and the Beanstalk, they all have that modicum of reality, even though they're fairy stories. Every little girl wants to be the princess that goes to the ball. Every little boy wants to be fighting pirates and flying through the air, and that's just what you naturally grow up to be and you hope for, and then suddenly reality kicks in and you're the old scrubber down with the washing machine like everyone else.
So what do you think then attracted you to the role of Dame?
I don't know. Probably the idea of big comedy. It was the big comedy part. It was the fun part. I always love a good costume. I don't see Dame necessarily as a woman. I see it in terms of costume. People see you dress up and go, well, I'm not dressed up as a woman, I'm dressed up as a character. I see her every time I do my makeup for a different character. I look at it and a queen will have lots more glitter going on and things like that, whereas if it's an old scrubber, no, she won't, or the eyebrows are done a bit different. Or every year I sit there and the first couple of performances, it all evolves to become whatever she's going to be this year. No, in my view, no Dame should ever just copy the same thing straight off. It has its own element, because you're not bringing out the same show every year. Every year is different, and you're learning every year. No one should really. I was always taught you don't stand still in the theatre, you go forwards or backwards.
How then did you actually become a Dame?
A bit of a dark story is it's not a horrid story. I worked with the company for 2 years. I'd played comic, did Jack and the Beanstalk and Dick Whittington. The year after, they were doing Aladdin. I'd auditioned to play Dame. I was 17 at the time, to play Dame in Dick Whittington, and lost out to someone who was older. And at the end of the run, the director turned to me and went, I wish I'd cast you to do it. But that's by the by. But over the summer, my mother sadly died. And literally a couple of weeks later, the same director, a very good friend of mine, Pat, she literally turned to me and said, right, you can now play Dame. She said, you have to know, you can do, comedy's comedy, but to play Dame, you have to know the darkness as well. And, my mother died sadly through a disease and an illness. And so that darkness, when you have to sell the cow, when you've got no food or no in, you have to be able to do the pathos as well. It's not just a comic role. It is a character that's blown all out of proportion, but you have to have heart. And if you haven't got the heart, you've got nothing.
And how was it playing it that very first time?
When I look back at it now and I look back at pictures, I was awful.
Really?
I really think I was awful. It was everything thrown at it. And I suppose the things I've learnt now is how to relax, and I think the funnier dames are the ones who literally are a version of themselves blown out, and the people you remember people like Christopher Biggins, Barry Caleb, because they are a version of themselves. They're not... I mean, Larry Grayson, I believe, used to do it. He used to come into the theatre, take his suit off, even though he was wearing it on stage that night, sit in front of the mirror for 5 minutes and then put the suit back on, because he was putting on the performance. So even though he was already wearing his costume, he came back on to feel what that character was now becoming. Larry Grayson, the performer, not Larry Grayson, the man from Netherton having a cup of tea. Not Netherton, forgotten where he's from. Nuneaton.
Nuneaton. Near enough.
I should know that. I grew up near there.
Have you ever analysed your dame?
My dame comes from 5 women. I'm probably one of the last generation to have the old maiden aunts. And there were 4 women my grandmother was from Llandudno in North Wales, and we had 5. They were actually cousins of mine, but we always refer to them as aunts, because obviously the age difference, you wouldn't refer to an 8-year-old woman as your cousin, but we were always referred to them. And there were these big, boisterous, proper seaside landladies, even though they weren't, but they reminded me of the proper Norman Evans over the garden wall women. I mean, the one with my Aunt Marjorie, I only remember seeing her out of curlers twice.
Wow.
Because every time we went up, it was a Sunday, and Sunday was the day she had her curlers in. So the only time I ever saw her was either a funeral or once my uncle was mayor of Llandudno, so that was a special occasion. So we were all up there, and so she was in full sail, I suppose, as Joyce Grenfell would say.
And the look then, because you create costumes as well.
Design. You sit there with a notebook, and sometimes you get a colour scheme, so sometimes you're told something, or sometimes I'm lucky to live near Birmingham, so I go into the rag market and wander around quite a lot and literally just go, oh, that fabric would be really good. All right, we're doing Jack and the Beanstalk this year, so I'm looking at ginghams, I'm looking at florals, I'm looking at certain things. Or if you're looking for a specific scene, I tend to stick with a rule of 3, which is usually 2 major colours and a minor, just because I think it looks neat on stage. I'm not one that literally wants to throw every colour in the paint pot at it, but I think it just looks nice on stage. And I like it to look clean and neat and not look like you've just thrown your head in the rummage sale out the back of the church.
Does a lot of that, though, come back to the early days when you were in that rep theatre group, and with knowing how lighting works, knowing how sets work?
Yeah, and it's knowing what will light nicely, where the light's coming from, what your audience is going to see. We were quite small theatres, so shoes have always been important. I mean, I don't have a lot of money even in these days. You know, I work have to work during the year. Normally, I don't always work in the theatre, so I'm always conscious of budget. So I spend money where I need to. So the costumes I can make, and I can spend, if the sooner I know about them this year. I mean, this year I've been playing Queen, so I've made quite a few new costumes because it's the first year I've played Queen. So there've been quite a few new ones that have come out this year. But I've known since January I was doing it, so every 8 weeks I made a new costume. Over the year that's built up, so it's been quite nice that way.
Does it help then with casting to be able to say to a director or a company, I come with X amount of costumes?
It gives you I've got over 40 costumes in the wardrobe, and there are a lot of them that I wouldn't touch again. There are a lot when, sadly, one of the theatre group that I first did pantos with closed due to the building being sold off, I was given some bits. I bought some bits as well. So I sort of came with a little stock of wardrobes. That a lot of them now have ended up in my strip costume. So if I do a strip, there's sort of a history in my panto on a washing line. But it's quite... So that was where it started. And then as I've been able to, I've bought wigs and had wigs made. And so it's been the wigs and shoes that I've spent the money on, because I've then been able to make the costume. So what I can't make, you buy.
Who taught you then how to make?
My mother and grandmother both taught me how to sew, but never much more. I think the most we ever made was when I did Romeo and Juliet at college. I made a monk's habit, and then about 15, no, it's got to be longer than about 20 years ago, I was doing Jack and the Beanstalk's second pantomime I put on with the Dabber's Theatre that I was working with. They'd never put on Panto, and I managed to persuade them to do it and bring it back. And they were doing a summer open day, and I needed a costume, and although I was hiring the rest of the costumes, I couldn't afford to hire it for that day in the summer, so someone gave me an old mannequin. I literally padded it out to my size. I still use it, and I thought, I'll have a bash, and just started laying it on. And that's still much the way I work now. Is I find fabrics, I'll do a little bit. I've made some of my own patterns, so I'll make a bit. It will sit in the corner of the living room for a week, and I'll look at it and go, do you know what, I don't like that, or I do like that, or I just want that on it. And so it will just build and build until I'm happy with it, and I'll sketch and draw, and I'll sit there and just doodle away as you do, and just see what comes up. So sometimes I'll look at someone else's design and think that will spark, or I want to find out how that was made. So I'll have a play at making a similar neckline or a similar collar, or sometimes you find fabrics that you like and think, oh, that would make a really good nurse's dress, or that will make a really good school dress, or so you make things according to what's about and what you see and think, well, that would look really good on stage. Or so those are the different ways sort of costume evolves. And then finales, you want to go all out. I mean, this is the first year I've actually bought a finale, just because I really like the dress. It's a copy of a dress from well, it's someone from Drag Race, and there is a shop in Birmingham which sells all drag costumes. So he's made it for me. So it's a bit stunning. It's all drop sequin and ruffles and massive.
Yeah, show me later. So the thing I'm finding whilst recording the podcast is dames are such hoarders.
Oh God, yes.
Why is that? Why do you hoard so much?
Because you never know when something's going to come back. Principal boys come back around. They will have their time again, I'm sure. You know, they go round in cycles. You know, it happened just after the war. The men came back, and Norman Wisdom and those kind of things came into playing Principal Boy and Tommy Steele. And then Cilla Black came back in and started playing Principal Boy. So I'm sure at some point they will come back. And it's very much with dames. Just don't throw something out just because it's not been on stage for 10 years. Sometimes it just bears, well, I'll use that for a pattern, or other times you go, well, I'll pull it out. And there are all sorts of things. A number of my costumes have ended up in Twanky's washing basket over the years. Just to go back and go, well, I've used it. Put it back in the cupboard, and there are wigs that are all matted together and things, but they still don't go.
No, I've never known anything like it, honestly. No. And I'm a hoarder.
Yeah, every day Mino does it. We've all got little corridors and boxes and things of stuff, and every time we get the chance, we have a look at see what other people are doing and how they do. And I suppose that's the joy of being a dame that has their own costume, is you make it specifically for you. And I get asked by other people to make stuff for them. I know how to wear what I make. I'm not sure, I'd be one that's sitting there going, you're not wearing it right.
Yeah, is it like an extension of your personality, though?
It is. Yeah, if you don't feel right in the costume, then you don't feel right in the character. And it is a character. She is someone's mother. She is, you have to be somewhat of an actor to do it. I think if you forget that, you do lose it.
Is there anything of mum that you've put in there?
A little bit of my mum. It's more my grandmother's day. And it's watching people like Les Dawson and Roy Barraclough on TV. My Dame is probably more on the Roy Barraclough end than the Les Dawson end. I'm not quite on that crude level, but I love both sides of it. I love the commonness, and I try and fade through all of them, so at some point you will get the man's voice, you will get the female voice, you will get... I look at those old, and sadly there aren't that many of them, the old videos of Terry Scott and George Lacey and things like that. And you've got to look at the past to learn, because if you forget the past, you'll only make the same mistakes again. That's what they always say. You've got to learn from your past to know your future.
You said that first time you played it, you weren't really impressed with yourself. Any other mistakes that you've made, or anything you found out that you'd like to share with listeners to avoid pitfalls for?
Most mistakes dames make are made in the early years, and you've got to make them, sadly. They're the kind of things that it's now, I think I worked it out earlier, I've been played Dame 23 times officially. Well, there's a few other smaller productions, but in terms of main productions, and it's only the last sort of 5 years I'm sort of starting to get happy with her, because she is a separate entity. She doesn't exist until she gets to the theatre. And even in the rehearsal room, quite a few times you do something in the rehearsal room and you look at it and go, it's not right, but you go, yeah, but with the frock, with everything, that will work. There's quite a few times, and she doesn't, until the audience is there, often the spark. And a lot of comics are the same. You see a lot of them in rehearsal, and they walk through it, and you're just crossing your fingers and hoping, and then suddenly on the night, out she comes, and
the magic sprinkles there.
That is the magic of live theatre. Without an audience, it's not theatre. It's just a group of people in jeans walking around a room.
Do you like a matinee then with the kids?
Every audience is different. It doesn't matter, Sometimes they don't get a dame quite as much. They understand that the character is someone's mother, but I suppose the dame as an actual character doesn't exist as much in real life. You don't see the scrubber washerwoman mother so much. You tend more to see the more glamorous end of it, than the one who was scrubbing the step on a Sunday morning without any carpet. We all know of those old days where, as long as your step was clean and you had nice white nets, you were all right. You might not have had a stick of furniture in the house, but as long as those nets were kept clean, and that.
I know exactly the type you mean. Yeah. Now things have changed, though, haven't they, recently as well? How do you find now with sort of this whole PC regard to it all? You said it's cyclical how pantomime evolves, but people are very quite offended easily now by things as
Sadly, they are, and a lot. You look back at a lot of the old jokes, and you go, "Oh, I couldn't do that anymore. Oh, I couldn't do that anymore." Yet, you probably look at the Victorian stuff, and the Victorian theatre was massively raucous, and you think, "Oh, I wouldn't do that anymore." And, but it came back. It goes. It travels. The audience. Sometimes you tend to find it's not the people being offended themselves. More people are offended because it could offend someone else. And that what seems to be the big way is, you can't do that because it might offend this person or it might offend that person. At the end of the day, if it's funny, it's funny. you know, if a joke works, it works. But if most of Panto is at someone's expense, you know, the day, you know, there will be someone do a joke in the day, and the Dame will show, you know, fall over and flash a bloom, you know, it's at someone's expense. That's sort of why many times I've forgotten who said it. I think was it Roy Hudd who said it. If a man falls over as a woman, it's funny, but if a woman falls over, everyone goes, "Oh, that's undignified." In as a dame, and so that's perhaps why it works. It's a strange tradition.
It is, and nothing else like it in the world either. Have you had much reaction from other people when they find out, you know, you're a dame?
Often people are just interested, you know, how it goes together, what happens. You know, people only see, especially in this TV age, people see a box on the wall. Even if you're in the theatre, people still see that box, and you're just what happens behind it. No, we are very much a screen age, and so it's just a bigger screen. It's like, I suppose it's like the cinema, in that we all see things within the screen, and that's part of what you're telling a fairy story. You're telling a tale. The audience don't want to see 50,000 people running backstage trying to get something on stage. They don't want to see the crane that's moving a massive piece of scenery around. They want to see that this dragon or something comes flying out at them. They don't want to know that there's 15 men holding on for dear life at the back of it.
I've seen the dragon backstage. It's definitely a big old piece of machinery as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's what that moment of spectacle. I mean, I love seeing things like the dragon. I'm not involved in that scene, but when this one comes out on it, it goes over the heads of the front rows, and the amount of times you hear little children go running up the back of the stalls.
Do you think Panto needs that then? That little bit of fear as well, to install that sense of fear in children?
You haven't got hope if you haven't got fear. You know, that's part of what every story, every pantomime has to have its villain, has to have its. If you've not got that element of danger, you've not really got a story. You've just got a happy ending.
Have you ever played villain or wanted to play villain?
I've played the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wizard of Oz. That was on the Millennium, as Rick Wood used to call it. And I loved it. It's a strange mindset, and when I've directed people, you have to sort of do the talk of, you've got to remember a boo is a cheer. Just because they're saying boo at you does not mean it actually means you're doing your job right. So I would love to do I mean, I've never done Ugly Sister yet, but at some point I'd like to give it a go. But you've got to find someone you're happy to do it with and that you can bounce off.
That wicked tearing scene.
Yeah.
I think you relish that.
Oh. I always remember it was Nigel and Peter when they did the Panto Land thing, where they just say, at the moment they say tear it up, you just freeze, because all eyes are on Cinderella and all eyes are her hopes and dreams falling into the dust on the stage.
It is horrible when you look at it and you think, wow, actually this is real bullying going on here, and this is.
But if that doesn't happen, she, you know, if she walks into the first day, someone gives her a ticket to the ball and she goes, there's no drama. You know, theatre is all about drama. And, you know, no one wants to see someone. You know, it's just someone getting doled up for a party that night. You know?
Well, when you write your own pantos, how many have you written now?
I've written about 6, but many of them have been edited about five or six times each, because they've gone on from different productions, because they all started out in an amateur theatre, and then some of them went into professional productions as well. So some of them have had to lose characters and things, just because in an amateur theatre you have a cast of thousands, and professional theatre you can't afford it. They were written as a professional style, so they've got the standard characters and standard scenery.
Yeah. So when you're actually writing them, where did you draw your inspirations from? Obviously you've got your core story, but
the theatre I started in had no wing space. The flats were 9 foot high. It was a 25-foot square stage, including the cross arch. coming in. So the theatre I had to design it for, everything had to be designed. I had to design the set before I could do the story. So I had to work out, right, we're doing Dick Whittington, how do I do a ship? How do I do a story? How do I get to Morocco? How do I do this? We did Jack and the Beanstalk, I remember, and going, right, how do you do a giant where basically my wigs are touching the ceiling? So how are you going to get a giant on stage? And the only way I could overcome it was, right, we play it inside the cupboard of the giant's kitchen, and at some point the door will open and there'll be a giant eye there. And the fairy came on, fired a spell at the giant's eye, and the giant eye pulled back, and what happened to be one of the smallest people in my cast rolled through as the giant. So Jack had a fight with the actual giant, but the fact the giant was only 5 foot high. So you work out how to deal with something and then go from there.
But put a funny twist on it
Yeah.
as well.
And then every tale has to have its own little... There's no point seeing the same show over and over again. You know, how many times have I done Jack and the Beanstalk now? Probably about 17 times, and every time I've done it is a different way. It's a different... You have different things to it. How you see the giant, how you get there. I've seen them float up on balloons, or been carried by British Airways. Or, there's all different ways of getting, especially the Dame character, because only Jack needs to climb the beanstalk. Everyone else can get there however they like.
And do you find yourself, when you're going to see a lot of other pantomimes, do you find yourself quite critical?
Oh, I'm dreadful. I'm the worst audience member. I sit there with my arms folded, scowling.
Oh.
People have said at me and looked at me and gone, "Smile, for God's sake, please." And I go, "No, I'm sat there. I never sit in like the front, because I go, well, if anyone actually saw me from the stage, they'd think, what has this person come to see?"
It is disappointing, though. I go and see tons of pantomimes every year, and when it doesn't sit right and it just doesn't feel right, it is disappointing.
There are points when you're watching a show, you want to know the cast on stage are enjoying themselves. There's nothing worse than a cast going through the motions. Every show should be live. I mean, one of my favourites, I always used to say, some theatres do muck-up shows, and I always used to say, I don't want to do a muck-up show. Every show, the cast has enough leeway. I'm trusting you enough to say, if you want to try something, if you want to do something, if you want to do a little something, try it. Play with it. Because that's what makes it live. That's what... Occasionally I've done things where we've said, you've done it in rehearsal or something, you said, keep that in, and you've done a cod, but I hate it when you get a forced cod. There's nothing worse than the Dame falling back and a wig going off and everyone goes, ha ha ha. Because, you know, it's always nice. I mean, I can remember doing Jack and the Beanstalk, same theatre where I did that with the 9 foot high, and one of the first nights the beanstalk fell down. So it literally rose up during the scene and then immediately dropped back down because the wire holding it snapped. And I remember walking on stage out of my cottage in the morning, all in my night dress, and suddenly the cloth firing down behind me, and literally being 5 minutes just sat on stage on my own while people are throwing this beanstalk over the top of my cottage. And so suddenly I'm going, okay, there's no beanstalk there tonight. Let's work past this. So you have to make it live, but the audience like nothing more than going, oh, we were there the night that, and there's nothing worse than having to say, yeah, that happens every night.
Yeah, you can always tell by looking at the band, can't you?
Yeah.
If the band are laughing, then you
Yeah.
know it's not a cod corpse.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and there are some that I don't mind if it's one that's happened and it stays in because it worked, but it's nothing worse than a forced one, because it's not funny for anyone. The audience laugh and go, oh, okay.
Well, you've directed as well. Have you ever given your feedback as well to these?
If anyone, I never offer it deliberately because I know how critical I am. Because I'm one of those people who go, I was the person who taught me in that respect, or who I follow. There was a family at the theatre I worked at called the Barneses, and Nicholas and Davina, his mother, both of whom I owe an awful lot to my childhood of theatre. because both of them were ex-professionals and both of them had worked, and their work ethic was, it has to be perfect. You may be in an amateur theatre, but that doesn't mean, that just means you do it for the love of it. You don't get paid. So, I mean, there are millions of brilliant amateur productions out there every year. There are millions of awful ones as well, but, you know, jokes can be made about how bad an amateur, you know, the church hall up the road is, but equally the other way. I've seen some absolutely brilliant stuff that have come from it. And without the amateur theatre, many performers wouldn't be there. Because I know a lot of performers who've come up through the amateur world, and that's how they've learnt. And you get a good ethic off that. Because, I mean, the theatre I'm in, we did 12 productions a year. So there were constantly 3 shows in rehearsal. We didn't do, as some theatre companies do, where they do 6 months rehearsal. I worked with one company that did that, and I can remember rehearsing from September a pantomime, and then we went away for 2 weeks at Christmas and came back, and we might as well not have done the first 6 weeks because no one remembered anything. No one remembered a dance routine. We basically put the show on in the last 4 weeks. You just think, well, why did we bother doing anything before Christmas? We might as well have just all come together. And so the little theatre I worked with, but I used to design sets with them and everything for all sorts of stuff for theatre, for plays. And I mean, I love Shakespeare. I'm a massive Shakespeare fan, and I see a lot of Panto in Shakespeare, and a lot because he's writing for an audience. You know, people see this big tome on the library and think, oh, I'm not going near that. Well, actually, if you look at ones like Merry Wives of Windsor, Merry Wives of Windsor is just basically a panto written in Old English. Because it's men dressing up, I mean, Falstaff dress up with a woman, he gets chucked in things, it's how to get his own comeuppance. It is his own story.
Modern interpretations as well.
Yeah.
How do you think Panto's going to move forward then?
It always will move forward and always has moved forward and is always going to do that. But what's going to happen? You know, I think music is becoming increasingly harder to take from modern genre because of the style of music that's in the charts. It's harder to find. I mean, last year we had Baby Shark everywhere. But this year, there's not been that song that everyone's clinging to. There's a couple of ones which have got something which you can sort of grab onto and use. But some years there is, some years there isn't. Some years there's the Mr. Blobby or the Minions or whatever that you can cling on to. But it's getting harder to find that one song to do. And sometimes you have to go back and use the standards and do that. But as long as every theatre is pushing to do something better, I mean, that's the way I was taught, is you should always, what you've done is not good enough. You should always be trying for the next thing. The next rung is your aim. And I was always taught that with costumes. You don't make costumes for the theatre you're in. You make costumes for the theatre you want to be in.
I like that.
So that was sort of the way I was taught, is you may be in a 100-seater theatre in the middle of Sutton Coldfield in the Midlands, but if you want to be sat at centre stage on the London Palladium, you know, what's the difference? The difference is just the amount of people and the audience you're in. The way you should feel should be the same.
What's been your favourite theatre that you've performed on the stage?
The theatre I felt the most one I loved performing in was the one I worked in last year, which was the Theatre Royal Margate. It's the second oldest working theatre in the country. Designed by the father of what's his name? I forgot his name.
Frank Matcham.
Matcham, yes, the father-in-law of Frank Matcham. So it's even older than all of those. It's a tiny little theatre. It holds about 400-500 now. But a beautiful little. It was built by the same person who built the Old Vic in London, and it's basically a miniature model of the old Vic, and it's beautiful to have the boxes there to, the ashtrays as they used to be called in my childhood, or the council flats occasionally. The Dame would always refer to them as, "Oh, we got people in the council flats tonight," in the boxes, and it's lovely to have that horseshoe. And the theatre feels like it hugs you when you've got those old theatres, and there's nothing better. And, I mean, so many theatres now have been pulled down or replaced by modern, especially the 1960s interpretations, and they do the job. They're they're nice to perform in, but they don't. The theatre used to be part of the experience of going to the theatre, the grandeur, and that seems to have gone a little bit, which is a shame. The ornate plasterwork and all that. The wonderful smell that you get of them.
What about backstage, though? Because some of them
backstage, and some of them are horrendous.
Yeah. Some are terrible. Not this one.
The backstage, I can remember at Margate, they built, luckily they don't, at some point in its history they'd taken the house behind it and knocked through. But if you'd have just had, there was one dressing room underneath the stage, if you'd been there originally, and the steps to go up were dangerous, to say the least.
Can't imagine doing your changes.
No, as I said, there's no way. It was the first thing I said the moment I got backstage. There's no way I'd be going in heels down there.
You've played King before as well.
Yes, I played King a couple of times. I've done a version of Alice in Wonderland this year where I played King, and a very long time ago, it was more of a children's play, Hans the Witch and the Goblin. It was one of these 1950s fairy tales plays that they did for children.
Where'd you get your voice from? For both Dame and for King?
I really don't know. She just comes. You sort of do each Dame has a slight element of, I think of someone who I might go, oh, I'm going to go for my Auntie Winnie there and just push it a bit. And so, there are different names. I mean, I love those old-fashioned names. But they were wonderful characters, and they were big characters. And I remember watching Les Dawson and those kind of people and thinking, I see those people in there. I see those, and spending a lot of my childhood going up to Llandudno and Aberystwyth, which is where my family's sort of from, even though I grew up in the Midlands. So hence the reason I don't really have a Brummie accent.
No comment. I wouldn't dare say anything about the Brummie accent at all. What about the makeup then, and the look?
Oh God, that changes every year. Every year. Sometimes it's to do with what's available and what I can. About 10 years ago, I started using eyelashes, and it's not necessarily to be frivolous, but it highlights the eyes. I know I have hooded eyes, so therefore anything to sort of pull them back open is always great. I don't like overly clown makeup. I think that worked at a time when you had massive theatres, but in closer theatres you need a more realistic edge, but not. I like a sort of halfway house. I like to think of almost like those ladies who put on too much, who didn't take the makeup off last night and just applied another layer and went out.
Yes, we've all seen them as well,
yeah.
Haven't we? So have you ever fancied sort of going down the whole drag route?
I get asked a lot of times, and I've always looked and thought, well, Dame costumes aren't drag costumes. There are a couple of costumes I now have which are more on the drag line, but it is requiring a whole different wardrobe, a whole different thing. So I do get asked. At some point I might, but I don't know enough people in that industry. I'm certainly not opposed to it, and maybe one day I will. But
what about for the ad-libbing?
You certainly look at that. I mean, obviously they're able to use a much darker set of. They can get away with a lot more darker humour than we can get in. There tends to be a lot of the same jokes that you tend to fall about. Oh, look, there's a man who's been washing his hair all morning and came out without it, or there's a lady who's dyed her roots specially. Or we've all done them, we've all seen them. I use them a lot because they're nice, handy. You can grab them,
And people
throw
don't
them
really
out,
take
and
offence.
the audience love them. Yeah, the audience love them, and that's the problem. Is I did 9 years. I actually had 9 years where I didn't do Panto, where I worked for Coombe Abbey in Coventry doing their medieval banquets. And although it was a very pantomime style, but I was their court chamberlain for 9 years. So I'm used to working with an audience close up that I can see. So it doesn't bother me if I can see the audience. In fact, I quite like it. Because you can start picking up on them. If they're looking bored, you can deal with it. You can go, right, well, that set of gags is not working. Let's move around a bit, or let's jump over a few and get out. Sometimes you have to go, yeah, this set of gags is not working. Let's just get off.
What did that involve then?
There were two characters. There was the court chamberlain and the court herald. And it was basic. We always referred to it as Carry On Coombe because it was like, it was very much based on the sort of Henry VIII, Carry On Henry kind of thing. We did a few stuff like that, but it was basically, it was an evening's entertainment. It told the history of Coombe Abbey, which was dissolved by the monastery, and sort of the audience had a 3-course meal during it, and then at the end we had 9 ladies who used to sing a mixture of musical theatre and some period songs, some funny songs, and it just used to be a whole evening of entertainment. There were little sketches that went through it, and it was lovely. I mean, we used to also do it for weddings and occasionally officiated at weddings and things like that. So it was a nice little... I love doing it, but it did take up, because we like doing Panto now, it took up all of December as well, because we were doing it every night, because obviously Christmas parties, it was its biggest season. And there became a point where I had to go, right, do I want to do Panto? Do I want to do things? Well, actually, I enjoy doing Panto more.
Have nerves ever been an issue for you then?
If I'm not comfortable with the show very much, if I don't think the show's ready, then I'll be nervous. I always used to write myself what I used to call a Terry Scott entrance, where he used to walk across the back of the stage, sort of notice the audience, carry on walking, walk off stage, and then walk back on. Because once I'd made that first entrance, I was fine. Because there's nothing... If you're nervous, there's nothing worse than coming on and sort of addressing an audience for 5 minutes. And I always used to make sure my opening costume was a long one, because I always knew my left leg would shake in the early days. So I'd be stood there and my left leg was going, and just go make sure you've got a long frock on for the first entrance. Well, I don't mind getting my legs out. You know, I'm a large guy, but I don't have bad legs. So, so it's always the one costume the one thing I always like when the audience go, well, you've actually got a fairly good pair of legs on you.
The dancing.
Ooh, I'm not a dancer. Although, I mean, you have to learn, and you can't do cod ballets, you can't do anything without knowing it. You have to know it properly to be able to mess it up. You know, no one would ever say, you know, if you're going to do a ballet, you've got to learn the ballet that everyone else is doing before you then learn how to mess it up. Because you can't say, oh, at that point you're going to twist, but you're going to go the other way and it'd be funny, because it might not be funny. You've got to feel that it's right and go, well, actually that's the point where you would naturally go wrong, so I'm going to make that the point I go wrong. And it's just how you do it. I'd love to do the cod ballet. I've never done it yet. It's one I've never done. There's always ones that you want to do. You know, I've never done Mother Goose yet. That's a big one on the list, but so rare, so few places do it now. And I'm probably still on the younger end of... Still got possibly another 40 years where I could play Mother Goose. I'm still on the right age.
Do you think it's going to be a permanent career now then?
I'd love it to be. Every year, so far every year, I've managed to move up a scale in some form or another. So hopefully it will be something that comes out to be something. I'd love to be at the point where I can actually say I don't have to do a normal, in inverted commas, job anymore. But hopefully, but it is it is an expensive line. It's not like every other cast member who just appears on the first day and gets told that's what you're wearing. I've got to think all year, right, I'm doing this year. I mean, there's nothing worse than getting to June, July and not having a job lined up for Christmas, although there are still a lot of companies haven't finished auditioning. But if you think, oh, what if I get a show I haven't done before and I've got to make a whole new wardrobe for it? I mean, luckily, so far, there's enough. I try and make some generic costumes, so there are some standard Dame stuff. In this, I wear a costume at the end which has got cobwebs on it, which I've designed deliberately, that all the cobwebs, once I finish this, because I'll probably never do a show that needs cobwebs on the costume again, because she's been asleep for 100 years, and this is the first time I've ever done Sleeping Beauty where the Dame has actually gone to sleep as well, although I appear in other bits. But so I deliberately designed it so all the cobwebs will come off, and after Christmas there's going to be snowflakes go on and it will become a Frozen costume.
Okay, yeah. Always thinking, always trying.
So almost every costume has got, especially if it's a specific costume, has got another thing for it. Like I've got my opening costume in this one is basically a Wicked Queen costume that's just dressed differently. So that if ever in time's gone down the road and someone says, oh, I'd like you to play Wicked Queen, fine, I've got the costume.
Have there been any costumes you've tried making which you've just given up on completely?
Oh, a number of them. A number of them. There are a number of mistakes that have gone on. Because when you haven't got a pattern, you're always going to make mistakes. And I think that's half the joy of it. Half the joy is making a mistake. Because if you don't make a mistake, you can't learn. I mean, the one thing that's eluded me so far is a high collar, the big back collars. I'm still trying to learn how to make one that I'm happy with.
How do you learn then?
YouTube these days. That's the joy of YouTube now, is that you can watch, you can look at things and indeed I look at makeup tutorials of drag queens and things like that, because you'll get tips off anywhere. You know, you may not use everything from every person, but it's a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and that's why I think each day is different, because everyone takes their own bit of someone. And everyone grew up differently. Some people grew up watching specific people or things. I mean, a friend of mine used to go to, I mean, he still does. A good friend of mine, he goes to Windsor every year. That's been going for the last over 50 years. So he remembers people like Brian Burden, who played Dame there for 20 years. I'm sure things like with Berwick Kayler, there's a big audience who will think of a Dame as Berwick Kayler when you say pantomime.
Have you ever been resident anywhere?
Not really, not since I've gone professionally. In terms of amateur, I mean, I did 4 years with one company, I did 8 years with another company. So I have done it, and I would love to, if the right theatre came up in the right place, I'd love to do it, but we'll see.
To find your little home.
Yeah. At the moment, I love going around different places, and for 6 weeks of the year, you get to sit in a different town, be someone else. And I love being by the sea, but that's my childhood. So there is something about being there and being by the sea.
Oh, that's fine. Oh, we're doing well as well. Travelling around then the UK, because you've done Panto tours as well, do you find the audiences are different in different places? Material lands better in different towns?
Some places works better than others, but you can't say, oh, that's an affluent area, that will work, or that's a poor area, that will work. And just like every audience is different, you can't just say, oh, it's a school audience, this is what we're going to do. Because that works every time. It doesn't. Because it depends. You can have a school audience, but you could have one entire year of a school, or you can have a class from each year, or different groups. So you could have a whole room full of 6-year-olds, or you can have a whole modicum of them. So you can't just turn around and go, well, that's what's going to work. And I think that is the problem. Some companies look at it and go, we want to aim at that specific market. And if you go too specific, pantomime means for everyone. You know, its whole life. I mean, that is, in its own essence, the Latin of what pantomime means. It is a mirror of life. And we're just turning the notch up a lot.
What about though humour for north-south divide? Does that exist or not?
You tend to find political gags go down a bit better in the north, depending on what they are. But a lot, I mean, I was always taught with Panto, go out and buy The Sun every morning. Not necessarily because you want to read it, but whatever's on the front of the Sun, if you get in, you'll get a laugh. If you can get a reference to whoever's latest divorce or whatever, that is what nowadays, I don't need to buy it. I just look it up online and just go, right, okay, that's worth putting in. But a lot of the things, the big thing I'm always about is I love to do local references. And I think a lot of the big companies miss out on that. Because you forget that, okay, that production may have played Derby, Darlington and Denver, wherever, wherever it may have played, but it only takes 5 minutes to go out and talk to a couple of the box office staff or the cleaners or something and just say, right, who's the local MP? What's the local road that always gets jammed up? What are the local things that are worth mentioning? And I think that is such a thing that people often miss. Because that's what endears you to an audience. If they think, oh, you're one of us, you know what our problems are. Everyone knows that in every town there's at least one traffic jam or one road that you do not go down because you're going to get stuck there for half an hour. So it's a little thing that is just worth putting in. It just takes such a little time, but sometimes they don't get thought about.
Where do you see yourself then in 10 years' time?
I hope to be still performing. I hope to be still doing it. I'd love to be doing. Everyone wants to do bigger, larger theatres, bigger audiences. I love doing a long run. Because just doing different audiences and seeing what they do, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. I mean, sometimes you get given a little bit of freedom to play enough that if you have a good audience, you can put in an extra couple of gags or take out. And sometimes that's trust. The producers have got to be able to know that they can trust you and know that, right, it's a Saturday night, we're going to go on the blue end. I mean, that's not where I want to be. I don't, that might have been okay in the 70s, but I think the world has moved on enough for that. But that doesn't mean that you can't flip an extra gag in or suddenly there's something come in that's worth putting in. So that sometimes can be the problem because people try and do Panto like a West End musical, which is great, but if you forget that element of liveness of it, that is what I love about it, is that little bit where you can just say a little bit about something that's gone on today or something that's happened or that little side remark, especially if an actor, there's nothing better than if an actor thinks they've got away with doing something that they shouldn't have done and you pull them up on it on stage and the audience love it. If you suddenly turn around and go, you almost forgot that line, didn't you? Or should we go back to the script now? Things like that. And just those little occasional lines that just remind that it's live theatre and you're not in your home now watching a film. I think that's the love of it, and that's the biggest thing. I think every school should go to see theatre because it is a wonderful thing to have. You can get lost for 2 hours in a world of adventure, make believe, and that I think is the big thing actors need to remember, is that may be your 50th performance of that show. You may have been doing 5 shows a day. Not that I have. Luckily, I haven't never done 5 shows a day. I've done 3, but 3 is my worst. But to that audience, you've got to be fresh as you can.
What don't you like about pantomime?
the fact the top of my eyes are blue for about 6 weeks after, because makeup eventually will stain it, no matter how much good stuff it is. I mean, there's nothing worse. I remember playing The Wicked Witch of the West and being yellow for 6 months, because it just leached into my skin that much, and it wasn't good makeup at the time. Look, makeup's getting better, luckily, but at the time it wasn't good makeup.
Wow.
And literally, so the things you have to do for your art. I can remember I was growing my hair at the time, so I'd grown real hair and had to tie it all back, and that's a long time ago now. I just shave the hair off, it's easier.
Well, you've got a full head of hair at the moment.
At the moment, I decided to leave it this year, and it's causing me a lot of pain. I keep wishing I'd get rid of it.
Does that make a big difference then with the wigs?
It can do. It's more the fact that when I try to leave it long, hoping that I can clip the mics in, but my hair is quite fine, and so my mic never seems to stay in. So no matter what I do, it's a problem. So I've just decided, well, leave it wherever.
Being part of a pantomime company, then, what's that like?
It's lovely if you get a company where everyone wants to be together and go out and have a drink occasionally, or sit back a bit. There's nothing nicer than if you've got a bar near that you can all just sit down and just have a chat. Not necessarily, you almost missed that entrance, or did you know you came on with your zip halfway down your back? Or whatever did you say in that scene? Because it didn't make sense to me. We all do it. I mean, they always say an audience only ever picks up 30% of actually what goes on. So the amount of times we probably said something that's sort of what we were meaning to say, but God knows what actually came out of our mouth.
Have you ever been then with a bad company?
Luckily, I think I've done fairly well. There's been occasionally where there've been things that have happened which have not been particularly nice, and sometimes there's been cast against the producer and other things like that. I mean, there are times when we've all, you can't have the highs without the lows. There are times when you think, I'm glad this one's ended. Let's move on and carry on. And I think that is what we have to do. There's no point. You can either carry on or you can give up and go back to reality. I enjoy this life too much.
Do you get the Panto blues?
Oh, God, yes. I'm dreadful for it. Literally, for about 3 months afterwards, I will be in quiet solitude.
Oh,
no. And that comes back again if I haven't got next year lined up by about June. Especially when you see people start posting stuff on, the joy of Facebook is it keeps you all together, and that you all, I mean, I know now I'm in contact with most dames in the country and know them in terms of, and a lot of us will put a poster on, and you'll get a message 5 minutes later go, oh, where did you get that eyebrow makeup from, or where did you get that jewellery from, or so and if you see other people start posting stuff and you go, oh, I wish I was in that state.
Everybody in the pantomime community seems so lovely. Well, they are so lovely. Not seem, they are lovely.
I think it's because everyone is, it's such a difficult industry, and there's nothing worse. I mean, there are some people out there who aren't the nicest, and some of the old school celebrities, especially in terms of, I mean, you go back in history, you hear very horrid stories about some of the really old school ones who literally wouldn't talk to people, or would appear on the first day of rehearsal and just walk in and do their stuff and walk off again. But I think the world has, thank God, in that respect, has changed. That there used to be I can remember seeing scripts which would just say blah-de-blah's material goes in here, or blah-de-blah sketch, and you'd never see the rest of it, and you'd never know what happened, and literally they'd walk on at the technical rehearsal going, we will start the routine here, we will end the routine over there, I just want a plain light through it all, and the drummer will do this on the tag, and walk off again. But luckily, I mean, that was from the days of Variety, where people were doing that. I mean, if you think of someone like Wilson, Keppel and Betty, who were doing the sand dance every day, they literally could walk on and say, well, we'll start it here, we'll end it there, this is the music you're playing, we'll see you on first night. Because they'd done it every time. But
you mentioned quite a few old school names during
I love the old school stuff.
your interview, and just here and there, Wilson, Keppel, and Betty. There's not much material of them around.
No, there is literally a few videos of the sand dance, and it is such a sad thing not to have. There probably are somewhere in someone's attic somewhere a little reel of them doing something. I mean, I love, as I said, my love for old theatre is massive, and the old theatres I love. It is such a... I live, unfortunately, not far from the old Dudley Hippodrome, which they're fighting at the moment to try and bring back into life. And I have a few programmes. I mean, I collect programmes, so I have a lot of the London Palladium programmes and all from about the country. And I just pick them up online and to see what... Because it's lovely to see how things have changed, how different the way things have gone, who was in... I have programmes with like Leslie Joseph as a babe, and a few people who have come up and played other roles, and it's nice to see different people come up through the industry, and it's always nice to know that even a celebrity today has at some point had to put the graft in. We all know that. Sometimes you have to have the TV people in there to do it. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you get someone who really wants to be part of the industry and wants to know about it, and some people are sadly there for the money. And it's a sad fact, but that is what they're employed to do.
Well, this leads me on to my very last question. Your dream panto. And you're prepared.
I am prepared for this one. I wrote it.
So you know the score.
You can sadly.
Choose the venue, the production, the cast, live or dead.
I've stayed mainly on the deadline. As you can probably tell by the people I keep mentioning, a lot of them are of the old school. I think actually on my list there's only a couple of people who are still alive, and only two of them who are still performing. So... I've chosen A Sleeping Beauty, not actually because it's my favourite pantomime, because actually it's not. It is a lovely story, and it is I've done it quite a few times, and I enjoy it, but there was a specific reason, and it's because when I was thinking of fairies, there were too many to do one fairy, so I decided Sleeping Beauty, I can at least have 3. Although when we get... So, it's a production of Sleeping Beauty. Venue... I'm going to go with the Birmingham Hippodrome, but that's just because that is where I first saw pantomime, and that for me is the theatre I love to see pantomime in. So I'm going to go with there. For the first fairy, I'd love to see Hattie Jakes as a fairy, because I just think she would be fabulous. With a second fairy, Joan Sims, with her. Joan Sims is an interesting person in terms of she started out in the younger Carry On films as the beauty character and was incredibly good at it, and then became into the comedy. And so there's a nice mix of if you get there at the right age, and finally, the woman I adore as fairy, and I managed to see her once, and was a powerhouse performance that I can only remember with awe, is Barbara Windsor as the last fairy, which I think that little trio would be a lovely one to go with. As the king, you're going to start to see a little niche market come in here. I've put 3 possibilities.
Okay.
This is dreadful because a couple of them, but they're also Leslie Phillips, who I actually saw Falstaff, and it was brilliant when he played Falstaff. Peter Butterworth, who himself was a very good Dame, but would also be a good... And someone who I really wish I could see, and it's still about, and I met him, he's a lovely man, is Roy Hudd. So one of those I think would be the perfect king. As Queen, I've been deliberate here, because I couldn't think of... there was too many dames, so I've split Queen and Nurse. So you've got a Queen and a Nurse in this production. Going back a bit, you've got George Lacey, who I'd love to see. You've got Stanley Baxter, or Roy Barraclough, all of those, I think you could see they're the posher end of the dame market. And then as nurse, John Inman or Barry Howard, both of which I adore. I loved seeing John Inman. Sadly, I saw him just before he died, and I wish I could have seen him at his height. And the one who I really missed seeing, and I wish, and it's the one I keep getting referred to as my dame is the most like, is Terry Scott. So those would be my dames. Major Domo, or court chamberlain, whatever you wish to refer to him as either Bernard Breslau or Freddie Frinton. That's going back a bit. See, very old school. For someone who's 40, these are incredibly old school. The Jester, Jim Dale or Kenneth Connor, both of which on their younger days. But also, if we went back even further, I would love to see both of these started. Although both of them were dames, I'd love to see either Dan Leno or Grimaldi, just to be able to witness what they would do. Because sadly, there will never be a recording of either of those.
No.
And to be able to create that would be lovely. As Caraboss, the evil, either Fenella Fielding or Kenneth Williams, both of which are massive idols of mine. I am a massive Kenneth Williams fan. Failing that, if I had to, Maureen Lipman, because I love Maureen Lipman as well, and she was a very good Caraboss. I've put a little lady in waiting in here just because this is an actress I love and I think is very much missed as a character in the early Carry On films, with Esme Cannon, who appears in the early Carry On films and is a wonderful little bit of character as a tiny little extra part.
Especially when she was in Carry On Cruising.
Carry On Cruising is the little lady playing ping pong.
Yes.
Which all sounds... And two ladies I adore, and these are the two that are still performing, is as Prince and Princess, and I'm happy to go either way round with these, actually, for once, is Anita Harris and Sue Pollard. And Sue Pollard, I can remember the second production I ever saw, which was Jack and the Beanstalk at the Birmingham Hippodrome. She was as Jack, and I can remember the end of the first act where she sang an operatic aria and stunned the house, because literally you didn't expect that voice on that person. And I've met her several times since, and I love her to bits. She's an absolutely lovely lady. But that would be my dream little cast of Sleeping Beauty. And sadly, I wouldn't be in it because I want to be watching it.
That's really generous of you, though. Imagine the laughs as well. They were going to be getting it, because lots and lots of Carry On stuff.
There are, as you can tell, I watched a lot of Carry On films as a child and love them. I mean, I'm a special fan of the early stuff. I mean, my favourite film is Carry On Spying, which is going right back to the black and white one, so that is an incredible earliness, but that is my love.
Was comedy always important growing up then?
I don't remember a lot of comedy as a child. I only remember sort of the Sunday nights watching Last of the Summer Wine and that sort of stuff. We weren't sort of that sort of household that sat round telling jokes and laughing. That wasn't sort of the way our house was, but I suppose it's always nice occasionally to have, pantomime is escapism. It is that most wonderful thing that you can go to a theatre, sit in the dark. And I suppose it's the same especially the early days of cinema, where you hear of people during the war going to the cinema and just letting the world flow by them and seeing the big Busby Berkeley musicals. And you can see how in the war, where you've got nothing, where you're hardly eating anything, to suddenly see feathers and things flying across the screen, you can see how that can really lift a heart.
Has pantomime helped you then?
Oh God, yes, right? Yeah. I think I would be a very dark person if I wasn't doing this. It gives you an excuse to hide behind acting. Generally, you hide behind a mask for a few hours. You get a chance to not be you, to be someone else. You don't have to be who you were. You don't have to live in the house you live in. You don't have to wear the clothes you wear. You don't have to. You get to be someone else. Who else can say they played the king, the queen, the blah, and I can see the definite appeal of just being someone else, just stepping in someone else's shoes and seeing what what it is to be someone else for 10 minutes.
What would be your advice for younger dames listening, or younger performers listening?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you can always learn. I was always taught, the phrase I was taught at college was, always go and see a show that closes tomorrow, especially if it opened yesterday, because you can learn a lot more from a bad production than the good one. Because you sit there in a good production thinking, wow, what a wonderful production. If you see a bad one, you actually start looking at what you could do to improve it. Because no production is 100% terrible. Every production will have its merits. And if you can find that little ray of darkness and that little bit of light to pull out and say, well, actually, that may have been awful, but this little thing here was brilliant. And that's my little advice to the world, is never think that there is nothing. There's always something, no matter what you're doing.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking part in the podcast.
And it's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure.
Pantomime.